And we can thank the spirit and the embodiment of the buffalo to help us survive, prosper, and proliferate.
Today, on a special edition of This American Land.
The restoration from 25 animals to nearly 500,000 at this point is a real remarkable story.
Once on the brink of extinction, the bison are back, and so is their contribution to a healthy, diverse Western landscape.
I am the Cheyenne. These people are all my brothers.
Rare and riveting historical films reveal details of a complex intertribal sign language used by Plains Indians.
And I just thought that was a terrible tragedy that the largest land animal in North America, which is the bison, should be so badly abused.
This isn't just a story for one of his TV networks. Media mogul Ted Turner helped create the real-life comeback of healthy bison herds. All this and more, now on This American Land. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Hi, and welcome to This American Land. I'm Bruce Burkhardt.
And I'm Caroline Ravel. Every week, we bring you thoughtful stories about America's natural resources, its landscapes, waters, and wildlife. Today, a special edition of our show on an iconic animal, the American bison, or buffalo.
Now, these animals were nearly wiped out by a deliberate policy of extermination that came at the same time as widespread efforts to destroy Native American culture. More now on the deep ties between the buffalo and the Crow people. Here's Gary Stryker.
The American bison, the buffalo, is the largest land mammal in North America. As many as 50 million of them once roamed freely here. And through centuries, many Native American peoples developed a close relationship with this animal. It not only provided food, but was also a major source of clothing, shelter, and tools. It was indispensable to Native survival and played a strong spiritual role in their cultures. Today, more than 50 Native American tribes keep a collective herd of 15,000 bison in the United States.
It still remains the symbol of powerful spirituality, and it's one of the iconic representations of God's power. And that's how important it is to us as Crow people.
During the 19th century, the arrival of white settlers brought dramatic change to the Great Plains. As they pushed west, competition for hunting and agricultural land drove a government policy to subjugate and westernize native peoples.
Anything that was Indian culture was outlawed by the United States government, and the military enforced it at gunpoint. The United States government employed forced assimilation where they used military personnel and missionaries, Christian missionaries, to coerce the American Indians to become good little Christians, become farmers, and give up their native culture and become good little white men.
Commercial hunting and deliberate killing of bison pushed the species to the edge of extinction, and Native Americans to the brink.
The white man knew that if they killed off the buffalo, the Indians would starve. If the Indians were starving, they were no longer strong enough to do battle. And when the white man came and killed off the buffalo, that caused the great demise of the great Indian nations all across the West. Kill the Indian and save the man. That was the policy. And so that whole process came about, and that culminated in the loss of culture in many different forms. They came and took the food source away, made the Crow Indians and all of the other Indians weak, and they began to die from disease.
The incredibly harsh treatment of Native Americans and the eradication of their primary food source brought a huge reduction in the numbers of native peoples.
By the time 1900 came about, of the 70 million, there was only 750,000 counted in the 1900 census.
After decades of suppression, Robert Yellowtail, a respected Crow leader, convinced the U.S. government to allow his people to have their own bison on reservation land.
And in 1934, I think it was 34 or 35, my grandfather, Robert Yellowtail Sr., had that vision to bring buffalo back into the tribe so that the health would be better. So he went to Yellowstone Park, made the deal with the Park Service, with the government, and he brought in, I think it was about 105 head of buffalo. They made a buffalo pasture, which consists of about 29,000 acres, and now we've built up our herd to about a little over 2,000 head, and we still use them as a food source.
While the Crow tribe and other Native Americans still suffer the repercussions of the colonization of North America, the Crow buffalo pasture is redeeming a vital part of their past.
Because we want to provide service not to only our tribe, but to every other tribe that wants to be in the program. And so I see it as a very vital importance to not just the Native Americans, but to all people. The buffalo is the best meat source beyond a cow, any of the domestic animals. The buffalo is so high in protein, very least in fat, and I think that's why the Native Americans were so healthy.
The buffalo's return has strengthened the essence of Plains Indian ceremonies, including the Crow's ageless sun dance.
In the Crow sun dance, they make an appeal to the spirit of the buffalo to bring the power that they would impart to the Apsaugee people. And so the buffalo was not only a symbol of spiritualness, it was very important in the way that it showed us, how the future and what the future portended for us.
The spirit of the buffalo will provide a home for our people.
Native Americans have played a major role in bringing bison back to North America. A bittersweet success because of the high price they paid in the past. But there is now hope that their future generations will once again know firsthand the power and strength of the buffalo.
And we can thank the spirit and the embodiment of the buffalo to help us survive, prosper, and proliferate.
For This American Land, I'm Gary Stryker.
The Crow Reservation is the largest reservation in Montana, encompassing 2.2 million acres of rolling upland plains, along with the Wolf, Bighorn, and Pryor Mountains. The reservation is home to more than 8,000 tribal members.
In years past, when tracking buffalo, many Native Americans used a special sign language to communicate with others on the hunt.
It turns out this was a complex intertribal form of communication used by both deaf and hearing Indians. Miles O'Brien has some fascinating details in our Science Nation report.
Buffalo, come. Go straight. Jump over.
This extraordinary film from 1930 shows Plains Indian Sign Language, or hand talk. Both deaf and hearing members of dozens of Native American tribes have used it for at least 200 years, perhaps much longer. But there may be just a few dozen users today.
And all but lost his life in capturing a buffalo calf.
There was something about the sign language that made it seem like maybe neutral, that it didn't dominate any of the other languages.
So for distance communication.
With help from the National Science Foundation, University of Tennessee Sign Language Linguistics professor Jeffrey Davis is documenting the grammar, structure, and uses of hand talk.
We give thanks for the earth, which gives us food and water
and a visit to the Tennessee School for the Deaf. James Woodenlegs from the Northern Cheyenne and Melanie McKay Cody from the Cherokee Choctaw explain how tribes across most of North America have relied on this common language.
When they got together, they might want to trade for maybe clothing or something. Then they would use this intertribal communication. We've been traveling to the different tribes to try to find people who are still living in hopes of maybe compiling a dictionary.
I am the Cheyenne. These people are all my brothers.
During the Depression, retired General Hugh Scott arranged for chiefs and elders to meet in Montana. He filmed them using hand talk for the Department of the Interior.
Young men are not learning your sign language, and soon it will disappear from this country.
Davis learned about these films in a casual chat with another researcher at the National Archives.
I couldn't believe that these films existed. It's unparalleled that this many, chiefs and elders came together for this purpose. They knew the language was being lost. I think it was hard to talk about the other things too that were being lost. You can see it though in the stories. They're talking about those things, about how the buffalo used to be everywhere, and without railroads cutting through or telegraphs coming through. So they're telling this in their stories, but that's what the sign language is revealing.
How they jump over the cliff and run around in the pound below.
It's very complex and richly layered linguistically and culturally. And that's the thing we really want to get across.
Even if you're not understanding the language, sometimes you can tell it's a beautiful voice. That's what this is like. It's this beautiful, beautiful signing.
Half of the world's 6,000 spoken and sign languages are endangered. Those who love this unspoken language believe it would be a shame if it died. Hands down. For Science Nation, I'm Miles O'Brien.
Linguists have documented more than 6,000 distinct human languages, including about 200 sign languages. It's estimated at least half of these languages are in danger of disappearing.
Since the near extinction of bison, ranchers and conservationists have worked to restore this majestic symbol of the American West.
It turns out that having bison on a landscape improves the biological diversity of a region, and that means a healthier ecosystem.
They're big, and they're purebred. And out of the past, they're coming back.
Bison are one of the true iconic American species. How many animals are on a nickel?
As Europeans moved in and the United States grew westward, the American bison was hunted to near extinction. A century ago, just over 1,000 remained in all of North America, most of them captured by ranchers. As few as 25 wild bison survived inside Yellowstone National Park.
Yellowstone's very important to the whole history of conservation of bison in North America because 2 centuries ago, bison populations were declining deliberately across the country. And Yellowstone was a remnant refuge of bison where they never were completely eliminated from the landscape.
Thanks to 100 years of conservation efforts, today there are an estimated 500,000 bison in the United States.
The American bison is really the first big conservation success that we can point to. If we had had an Endangered Species Act back in the late 1800s, bison sure would have qualified as an endangered species.
The restoration from 25 animals to nearly 500,000 at this point is a real remarkable story.
Part of the motivation for preserving bison was economic. Ranchers recognized that breeding these winter-hardy and relatively low-maintenance wild animals with cattle might result in an obedient and profitable hybrid.
In the late 1800s, when bison were on the brink of total extinction, 5 individual ranchers went out and they caught animals out on the landscape. Part of their motivation was to save the species. Unfortunately, genetically speaking, part of their motivation was also to try to crossbreed cattle with bison, which they did.
Livestock producers recognized the hardy nature of bison on the landscape, and they recognized that they were, big and tough and put up with the extreme conditions of the Great Plains quite well. And what they tried to do at that point in time was interbreed cattle with bison to produce the ultimate range stock. They have a higher reproductive rate given low tending on the part of the farmer and rancher.
Of all the bison in the U.S. today, the vast majority are still in private herds.
Well, only 30 to maybe 40,000 of those animals are in public herd. The vast majority of them are under private ownership for bison ranching purposes.
In Oklahoma, some 2,500 bison in this herd roam the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, owned by the Nature Conservancy. The herd plays a key role in preserving this landscape, the world's largest protected remnant of tallgrass prairie.
The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to preserve biological diversity, and the best way, and perhaps the only way to do that with native ecosystems, is to get them operating as they used to. What were the forces of nature that created and maintained this landscape for eons? And in the Great Plains, it's all about grazing and fire.
Bison play an important role in our ecosystem in that they provide protein and food for many of the predators and scavengers. They also are modifiers of the plant community.
The remaining pieces of tallgrass prairie are just a fraction of what they used to be. This preserve, at 39,000 acres, cannot accommodate a herd larger than this one. Most of the time, the herd is left alone to wander across the prairie. But to properly manage the size of the herd and the health of the animals, they need to be corralled once a year. The main reason for the roundup is to control the population. Bulls become uncooperative when they grow too large and have to be culled and sold to market.
The other big reason that we do the roundup is so that we can treat our animals to prevent disease. So as you're watching the process, you'll see when an animal gets caught in a squeeze chute, they get several inoculations. Depending on what our veterinarian is recommending at that year, on what we think some of the bovine-related type diseases are, that's what we're trying to prevent.
Brucellosis is the primary concern. Bison are known carriers of the disease, which has basically been eradicated from domesticated cattle. A big worry for cattle ranchers is that bison will escape and carry brucellosis to their herds. The disease is a flashpoint between those who want to see wild bison roaming the landscape and cattle ranchers concerned about the health of their animals.
Brucellosis is a bacterial disease that affects the reproductive capability of animals, populations that become infected. It causes increased costs and lower production by the cattle operators.
Another aim of the roundup is to monitor the genetics of the animals.
Yeah, what you'll see us doing is yanking tail hairs on our calves. 20 to 30 follicle samples is enough to run DNA analysis on these animals. It's CSI type technology. Snip off the excess hair, put them in a little coin envelope, just a small little miniature envelope, label the envelope with that individual animal's ID. We box them all up and send them to Texas A&M University.
The university examines the mitochondrial DNA for cattle genes, a hidden genetic marker many bison carry from the era 100 years ago when ranchers were breeding bison with cattle. If the animal tests positive for cattle genes, it is removed from the herd and sold at market. Keeping the bison free from cattle genes is important for the long-term survival of the species.
We'll never have 50 million bison again, but we should have, ample examples of what this native resource was like on the landscape before humans changed dramatically what the North America looks like. And it really points out that restoration is not a very short-term kind of a project. It can take a century of work to have a fully restored wildlife population.
A century after almost permanent extinction, bison are coming back, real bison on their home turf.
The best description of a bison's temperament is unpredictable. They usually appear peaceful, unconcerned, even lazy, yet they may attack anything, often without warning. They can move at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour and cover long distances at a lumbering gallop.
He may be better known for his TV networks than his ranches, but Ted Turner has had a big impact on improving the health and numbers of bison across the West.
Both Turner and these fascinating animals are often described in a similar way: spirited, independent, and filled with a survival instinct. Marshall Walton has our story.
More than 500,000 bison are now grazing on private ranches and public lands across the U.S. 55,000 of them belong to one man, the founder of CNN, Ted Turner.
25 years ago when I started, there were about a seventh as many bison as there are today. So we are bringing them back slowly.
A lifelong conservationist, Turner has grown his bison herds while restoring large tracts of his land to their natural landscapes.
I just thought that was a terrible tragedy that the largest land animal in North America, which is the bison, should be so badly abused. As a distant dream, when I had 3, I started thinking of maybe having 1,000 and being able to look out the window and see what it looked like 200 years ago before the extermination took place.
And to make it possible to grow bison herds like that, Turner realized there had to be a market demand for them. It was clear to him that the best way to save these iconic animals was to eat them.
If you really want to save the species, go eat one, because that's what's really driven the whole industry. And the growth has really been in the private part of the bison industry.
Following his vision, Turner started the restaurant chain Ted's Montana Grill, featuring bison prominently on the menu.
Ted said what we need is to market these animals, and the best way to do it is to set up a restaurant chain and introduce people to the bison meat that I've enjoyed for years. They don't know what they're missing. We've got to present it right, do it right, have a great experience for people, and they'll come to appreciate bison the way I have.
If bison have an economic value like this, Turner believes the market will ensure they're in good supply. His restaurant chain now accounts for about 10% of the total bison meat market.
Well, I want to see as many bison as possible, and the only way we'll do that is to make them profitable to have.
What we're attempting to do is develop enough of a demand for the bison meat product that more ranchers will want to get into the bison industry.
The market for bison products is still tiny and has a long way to go.
The beef cattle industry kills twice as many in one day animals to go into the meat market than the bison industry does in 1 year. I don't think that we can aspire to replace the beef industry, nor would I want to.
Bison ranching is often compared to cattle ranching because of the animals' obvious similarities. But their care and handling are actually quite different. Bison advocates favor these animals because they're the native species, better for the land and requiring far less hands-on care.
They do best when you fuss with them the less. They don't really appreciate all of our stuff we try to do for them. They just like to be left out there on their own.
When it snows real hard and you have a lot of snow on the ground, cattle can't dig down through deep snow to get the grass. So when there's thick snow, heavy snow on the ground, the cowboys have to put out hay every day. Bison, on the other hand, the reason that they have the hump on their back is to support the muscle that allows them to snowplow down. They would have died out on the Great Plains in North Dakota.
But it hasn't been an easy business to grow the world's largest private bison herd. Cattle ranchers fear bison will infect their animals with brucellosis. And many of Turner's ranching neighbors are highly skeptical about his bison empire.
Whenever you do something new and a little bit different, you're going to get some suspicion and people wondering and so forth, and that's just human nature.
So what do conservation groups think of Turner's passion for these animals? Patricia Dowd is the Yellowstone project manager for the National Parks Conservation Association, an advocacy group that's been around since 1919.
I spent some time speaking with Ted Turner's ranch manager here in Bozeman, and then also his wildlife biologist who has worked extensively on bison issues over a number of years. And they put together a really comprehensive plan on how they're going to manage bison on their property, and they were more than adequate in terms of what they're proposing to do. As a private landowner, he wants to restore habitat and help restore landscapes to sort of their entirety. So he wants to include a variety of species on the landscape like they once existed.
The big challenge is to create a barrier that controls the bison but does not impede migration of wildlife. There's an old maxim in the West, good fences make good neighbors. We recognize that even though we raise bison, we are part of the ranching community.
Turner has installed special fencing to keep the bison on his land in a natural setting.
Our challenge has been to manage them to as small a degree as possible, to control them within the confines of a ranch that's not the same as the Great Plains.
Makes me feel good. I like bison. I like them a lot, and I like to see them. And I never get tired of looking at them. They're beautiful animals.
For This American Land, I'm Marcia Walton.
One of the stories we're working on for a future show. More than 1.5 million visitors check out the wild ponies at Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge off the Virginia coast each year. But will sea level rise change that habitat forever?
Thanks for joining us for This American Land. We'll see you next time with more stories about protecting America's landscapes, waters, and wildlife. So long.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts,